You're on.
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting Monday, June 15th, 2020 at approximately 5 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Chair, Councilor Romana Beta,
Here.
Councilor Signe Lindell,
Here.
Councilor Carol Romero Worth,
Here.
Councilor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Councilor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Under approval of the agenda, I don't know if it's just the agenda I had printed, but the lettering falls off after item D. Then it goes back to A, then B, then C, then E. And then, so if we can change the agenda so that A goes into E, the second A after D, does everybody see that? Or
Yes,
is it
sir.
just-
It's
Okay.
it's on mine like that too.
Okay, so then if we can just pick up after D, the A will become E, B becomes F, and down through the rest of the agenda. Is that good? Okay, and then I also want to know under the agenda, item J, which was the old item G, the resolution for the sale of potable water. Councilwoman Vigil Koppler is also a sponsor of that. So we need to make sure if Jesse can please add that before it goes to the governing body. That would be great. Are there any other changes from staff to the agenda?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, item G and H, we would like to remove as they have already been approved.
Okay, so those are gonna be J and K.
J and H, she said, I think.
Well,
Is
she
it-
said J and H under the old agenda, but we just changed those
Oh,
to J, K. So consider it, so the resolution authorizing the standard process for sale of potable water, that's being taken off the agenda, right? Mary?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
And then the next item, which is a approval of a service contract of $544,500 for design build for the Water Street parking lot. That's being removed also, right? And because they're already scheduled for council, or they were already heard by council? Is that what?
Mr. Chair, those have already been approved. Staff already took those through.
Okay, so they're being withdrawn altogether. Okay.
Mr. Chair, think-
Yeah,
I think Sig and I have the same thing. We don't need to make adjustments with the lettering. It's item D as in dog. Instead of saying 1, 2, 3 under it, they put A, B, C.
oh, that's where it got thrown off.
So it's actually correct. It just
Ah,
threw
that's
us off.
Oh, good catch. Yeah, I got confused. That should be 1, 2, 3. So then,
Thank you, Counselor.
thank you.
And
Okay,
Jesse
Additionally-
was cleaning that up.
Additionally, Chair Lindell is a co-sponsor on the sale of potable water.
okay, great. Okay, so we'll leave the lettering the same. We'll amend the agenda to under D, A, B, and C become 1, 2, and 3.
And Mr. Chair, we are also postponing item 8, the presentation from Public Utilities. That will be postponed until the Finance Committee meeting on 6/29.
Okay,
I have item 8 as the budget presentation.
yes, and we're not gonna have that.
Oh, and that is the one for Shannon. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, so any other changes to the agenda itself? That's the agenda, not the consent. We'll do that next. Can I have a motion regarding approval of the agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councilor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, approval of the consent agenda. I received a request earlier to remove item 7A so we can have discussion under 7A. And I have also have removed 7C. Are there any other things we want to remove from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, did you say 7C is in cat?
Yes, C as in
Okay.
cat.
Thank you.
Okay, so the two items that we're going to remove from the consent so we can discuss are 7A and 7C. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call?
Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, item 5 is approval of the minutes. These are the Finance Committee meeting minutes of June 1st, 2020. Are changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, changes from any members of the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I
Councilwoman.
have
Beal.
some adjustments. If you go through the document or go through the minutes, we say, let's see if I can find it. We're referencing Miss McSorley throughout the document, starting on page 8, and I think we meant to say McSherry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's, so I
Yes.
think it starts at page 8 and it goes throughout the document all the way to page 14.
I'll fix that.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, is anything else? Is there a motion?
Move to approve as amended.
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Then that brings us to item 7A, which is a request for the approval of using CARES Act funding, $361,227, provided by HUD to partially fund operations at the Midtown Shelter, requiring 3 approvals. 1, an amendment to the 2019 Annual Action Plan to increase CDBG resources by $361,227 via the CARES Act funding provided by HUD. 2, a budget adjustment request to increase the revenues by $361,227 and move funds. And 3, approval of a professional service agreement plus project budget in the total amount of $361,227 of the CARES Act funds for providing oversight and management of the Midtown Shelter, New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness. Let's start with Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd sent you an email that I no longer needed to pull this item. So I feel pretty good. Although Alexandra, I'd be interested to hear, and I'm not sure that you are the correct person to respond to this. This might be more of a question for Kira or Regina about how this is going to help us really transition out of the Midtown Shelter being a city-run facility and what those long-term plans are. Because my understanding is this is part of that longer-term piece of how we move from city standing this up as an emergency to what this looks like in the long run.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassette Sanchez, what this enables us to do, because the first step is to transition out of using city staff, right? So this allows us to hire contractors, professional service providers to step in and start providing the services directly. It gives us 6 months to plan both what is the next step in terms of location, but also we don't know what our programming needs are going to be because the pandemic has really thrown a lot of what we understood to be the reality of what it's like to be homeless in Santa Fe kind of up in the air. And we may have many, many more people who are homeless. So I think it gives us a chance to kind of see how things start to play out, see how Is it going to need to continue to be a place just as an emergency place for people to stay so they don't get infected or they can recover from being infected? Or does it start to move into a longer term, let's get people hooked up with permanent supportive housing, and so it's a little hard to know right now what it's going to end up looking like in 6 months, but at least with the CARES funding, we can continue to provide the service. We're not turning anybody out on the streets, and we can figure out what the most sort of flexible long-term plan is going to look like.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful in hearing, how that does lead to us having a little bit more nimbleness during this process. With this contract, what is the timeline for transitioning city staff out of running this into having, professional staff who are trained in this field be running the shelter?
Chair Beta, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, we will be hiring, the jobs have been posted, so we will be hiring as soon as possible. And as soon as those contractors are put under contract, as soon as we get the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness set up as our fiscal agent, we can begin that process of having outsourcing the work to non-city staff. So hopefully, now I say that, I also have to clear a few HUD hurdles, which HUD has greatly streamlined that process, but it is HUD, so we have to kind of tiptoe through it without making any huge promises. But I do expect within a few short weeks, we would have that done.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. I do not have any further questions at this time. Thank you.
Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. I've got just a few questions on this. Who other than this, well, let's start at the beginning with the CARES Act money. What were the qualifications for expending the CARES Act money? Did we have any other projects in the city that would have qualified for that?
Chair Beta, Councilor Lindell, we did not take too long to consider other projects because the nature of the shelter and what it's doing fits in almost exactly to how the federal government, specifically in this case HUD, since the entitlement funds come from HUD, wanted to see the funds used. So there was a lot of the criteria that was set out in the guidance for using the funds really focused on the health services and mitigating the health impacts. And as an organization, we don't do a lot of that. And so, but all of a sudden we actually were doing quite a bit of that through the shelter. So it fit very, very neatly. We get the funds are entitled to us, so we don't have to compete for them or fill out an application. The other option would have been to do a standard RFP process. We knew, first of all, that takes a while, but we also knew that all of our shelter providers and the organizations who work the most with homeless people were so maxed out and really had no capacity to create any additional programming. And they were quite frantic to figure out a way to try to keep the population density at their shelters at a level where they could observe some kind of social distancing and feel like they could keep everyone safe. So we talked about it, but we just thought, we're already doing it. This also takes some of the pressure off the city budget. And it felt like a very natural fit. We knew we could hit the ground running and there wouldn't be any kind of stumbles while you figure out like, oh, how is this new program going to work?
Okay, thank you. Are there other groups that are contributing to this financially? I mean, the county, St. Christus, are there other people that are willing to, I think, I forget the exact number that we're taking on, over 300,000. Are there other groups that are willing to come in and pick up some of that?
Chair Beitek, Counselor Lindell, this has been very much of a regional effort in terms of coordinating healthcare and services to homeless people. Generally, it's hard to coordinate services for this population because by their very nature, they're not in stationary. They move around a lot, which has been some of the challenges with Build for Zero. So we've taken the first step. I believe now if Kira were here, she may be able to, and I can ask her and get back to you. But I believe the county was interested in also supporting the process. I think once we come up with more of a permanent framework for this moving forward, we know that that Christus has been interested in um, supporting through money as well as the county. And I'll find out exactly because I haven't actually been part of those conversations. But I think what's really powerful about this is that we're making a case for this being able to actually be quite effective, and it's something we can do. So that's inspiring for other funders as well.
Okay, I'm trying to be clear and find out, I mean, it's really, really hard to ask under any circumstances, a council that's facing a massive revenue deficit to fund a new program. And we haven't seen the budget for next year. It's just, it's not that I don't think that we have to do this. I think we do, but it's a really, really big ask of this council to fund a new program when we're facing the kind of deficit that we are. Just trying to see if we can't round up some other people that would like to take some of this burden on. I mean, the county isn't facing anywhere near the kind of deficit that we're facing. I'm sure that there's hospitals and other healthcare, and I know that they've laid people off, but we're trying to find our way through this, and it's really hard for me to fund new programs knowing that we're facing furloughs and cutting services in other areas. And so those, the other thing is that I don't really think that the city has any capacity over time to be running a homeless shelter. And we certainly won't be running one on that campus over a long period of time. I see this as temporary, and I think that probably part of this should be some conversation about what our exit plan from running a shelter is, and who's going to step in, and where's that funding going to come from, and how do we do that? I mean, it's just kind of one more conundrum that we're faced with. And I don't think anybody doesn't feel like we have to do it, but we need to know really how far it goes, how long it goes, and how much over the course of the next 12 months we're going to be asked to pay for this. So those are my thoughts and my concerns. I don't expect an answer to them. It's just, I would have liked to have seen our budget before I had to vote on this.
Chair Beta, if I may make one more comment in response to that, Councillor Lindell, that is one of the reasons why the Coalition on Homelessness will be our fiscal agent, because the coalition is it's the fiscal agent for all of the continuum of care funds from HUD. So it coordinates that whole network of service providers. So the idea was not only would they be able to manage the operations right now with the city's input, but at least take that burden off of city staff, but they would also be able to design a longer term financial plan for funding funding the operations through the existing HUD funds. But I think to your point, and I do want to, I think that that's really important. What kind of commitment can our local partners make? And I think the 6 months buys us some time to figure out what that exit strategy is and what that longer term plan would be.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Lindell. Anything else from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
We have a
Second.
motion and a second. Any further discussion? Have a roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, that moves us on to item C, which is a request for review and approval of a reprioritization of city capital projects for the purpose of utilizing capital funds on capital expenses normally paid from city operating budgets. Mr. Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We brought this item before Public Works Committee, and they approved it. It's reprioritizing some of our projects in order to free up some money for capitalizable operating expenses. With this, we've been able to free up just over $7 million that can again be utilized for capitalizable operating expenses. One other thing this reprioritization does is it moves $250,000 of general obligation bond money from Swan Park to the MRC Soccer Valley. I explained exactly what's entailed in that at Public Works Committee as well as in my memo. I'd be more than happy to elaborate on it if anyone has any questions regarding any of those issues.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like some more information since I'm not on Public Works and I did read the memo, but I was wanting to see if, John, you could explain what specifically in terms of funds from Swan Park was taken, like, if you could describe maybe the amenities that will be put on hold and why we decided to move them over to the MRC Soccer Valley funding or the allocation of that, especially because we were able to get state funding for that and also some of our own funding sources. So if you could just explain the rationale for that.
Yes, I'd be more than happy to. The original $599,000 allocated for Swan Park was going to be utilized only for design of quite a bit of infrastructure. It wasn't going to be enough money to do any of the construction. The design included things that were taken out. The big ticket items that were taken out was a road extension from from Paseo del Sol West, a community lawn area, water playground, restrooms in a concession building, tennis/pickleball courts, BMX pump track, things of that nature. So again, these are all big ticket items that would have required a lot more capital to realize their construction. So toning this project down and amending its project budget down to roughly, apologize, I don't have this on the top of my head, $350,000 plus or minus. What that's going to allow us to do is design and construct some certain improvements. Those improvements include, give me 1 second, please. Water tank plant screening, horseshoe pits, the BMX pump track, dog park, hiker biker trail head / park overlook. And then we're also going to look to secure the perimeter with a concrete wall barrier, that temporary construction wall barrier. We've tried some fencing, I believe, and maybe even some cable wall barrier. And we've had a hard time keeping ATVs out of the park area. So we added this to the scope, and again, that'd be wall barrier. So those would be the things that we would design and construct.
You're on mute.
I saw it. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity. I guess now I'm wondering if we're moving it over to MRC Soccer Valley, what is that going towards specifically that we hadn't budgeted or hadn't? I mean, I know the ticket price for MRC is pretty large. So what are the things that 250,000 will go towards for MRC Soccer Valley?
Yes, you are correct. The entire scope for Soccer Valley is quite large. And even the 1.25 that we have allocated, 500,000 ours, 500,000 county, and 250 of legislative funds was not enough to get a whole lot done. So we're going to tone down that scope to try to do a few key items. And then we'll have that extra $250,000 that we're pulling from Swan Park available in case we need it to complete these items. If we don't need it, then we'll go through this process again, maybe mid-year or even for next fiscal year to free up that money for additional operating type expenses. The revised scope that we're looking to do at Soccer Valley is a GIS irrigation assessment, complete the irrigation system rehabilitation, field improvements and drainage, pump house assessment and rehabilitation, and then edge turf reduction and reduced water requirements. Things that we'll be removing from the scope would be field lighting, parking and circulation design, and field-specific rehabilitation. That being said, once we get into the design, we may have to reduce how many of the fields that we improve. And so, improving maybe 3 or 4 fields, depending on what the costs come in at. I know at Public Works Committee, Councilor Ndell had questions about the GIS assessment. I did verify with Jen Romero as well as Sam Burnett, who's the current project manager, that had not been done. What had been done in the past was an irrigation rehab back in 2008. But according to them, a GIS assessment had not been done at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Romero. Remind me, Mary, how much came from, I couldn't find it on here, but how much came from, for MRC from our general GRT?
I don't have that in front of me. Let me look it up.
Maybe John has that, I don't know. I was trying to remember the breakdown of like how much we each contributed and how much came from the legislature, just so I can put it to the forefront of my brain here.
Right, Councilwoman Villarreal, are you talking about the 500,000 we contributed, 500,000 the county contributed?
Right.
And then I don't remember the state amount either though.
Yeah.
$250,000, Mr. Chair, Councilor Villarreal, is what the legislature gave us.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
And that's safe? That's
So far.
okay. So far, you said?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, other questions from the committee? Is there a motion? Ms. McCoy?
Yes, we have additional information. I'm going to ask Brad Flitch to add some additional information. It's regarding our capital expenditures for RECC. He has an update that he'd like to provide to the committee. It does impact the GRT fund allocation.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. The city attorney's office, both Aaron and Marcos Martinez have been in mediation with the county over the RECC issues. Again, 2 million of the 18 GRT bond was allocated to the radio project.
Right.
There's also another project that's been going on that was not included in part of the GRT bond, and that's the computer-aided dispatch, roughly $1 million+ project that they are installing at the RECC as well. And so in their mediation with the county, they had called and said, well, where would we fund this from? And with the closure of the fire station, you know, and it being removed from this GRT issue, we'd like to see if there was some room to allocate, you know, the 425,000 to the CAD system. And there's also another outstanding issue we're trying to clarify, that at most would be 131,000 that we would want allocated to the RECC out of the GRT bond. And this is all new. This just happened Friday. So we'd like to bring it to the Finance Committee. John, I don't know if you need like sort of a friendly amendment to your memo, but we would like to see if the Finance Committee would consider including those two allocations in this legislation.
We'd be more than, on that point, we'd be more than happy to provide additional itemized information to the committee as a follow-up from that. As Brad mentioned, this is happening almost in real time. The mediation, I believe, was on Friday. So we'd be more than happy to answer questions and provide any backup on those two amounts that Brad mentioned.
Well, what I want to show respect to our Public Works Committee and our Chairman of Public Works. And so I would prefer that we postpone this then. We take it there first so that they could act on it, because the chairman did a really good job in moving this along with the committee. And then we thought it was coming to us as kind of a final blessing from finance. So I don't want to act on it until it goes over there and let John do the work with the committee, and then it can be brought back to us. But I don't know what the feeling of the rest of the committee members is. Councilwoman Romero Worth, we haven't heard from you this evening. Do you have a thought on this?
I would tend to agree with you unless this is time sensitive, which I don't think. I mean, it's obviously we need to be moving along here. Yeah, but I would also like to see the additional information that Mary is talking about.
Public Works meets next Monday, I believe, and then it could come back to us. Would that be fine? Mary, that's okay?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that is okay. That will also give us time if you have any additional questions when you actually see the backup, and we can do a write-up to provide more context.
Okay, and Mr. Romero, what are your thoughts?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I think that's a good idea to take it back to Public Works Committee. So we'll go ahead and schedule it for next Monday, and then we'll be back to you following that here at Finance.
Okay, can I have a motion then to postpone item C?
Move to postpone.
Okay, is there a second?
Who got the first?
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Chair, was it Councilor Villarreal who seconded?
Yes.
Thank you. Just not sure. Okay. Councilor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Councilor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
Councilor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Councilor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Councilor Jamie Cassette Sanchez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 9, matters from staff. Ms. McCoy.
Mr. Chairman, no matters from staff at this point.
Okay, let's go to matters from the committee. Do any of the committee members have anything? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if staff could give us a time frame as to when we'll be able to see some of those detailed breakdown items that we asked about in the last meeting, as it related to some of the budget deficit gaps we're trying to fill and what we're doing to support that, specifically the hiring freezes and what positions they were and what that calculated to.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, yes, we can get you that information. There's one caveat that is a point in time. So we've had several retirements and we are expecting more retirements or some level of attrition as we move forward. So the list that we give you will be a point in time as of now in June. and then we'll bring you an updated list in July for the budget deliberations.
Great, okay. And the other thing I had was, I don't know how you would be able to show this information to us, but, and I guess it will happen in the budget hearings, but I guess I just want to flag, we're asking departments to do 42% reductions across the board, with the exception of law enforcement and also fire. So I'm just curious if we have looked at other possibilities for those reductions so that they're more equitable across all departments.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor, the reductions from the FY20 budget levels that are provided to the department directors for an FY21 revised budget are actually dependent on the funding source. So it's not a 42% across the board for everyone. It is, the reductions vary from as little as a 0 to as high as in the, Brad, do you recall what the highest percentage decrease was? High 40s, perhaps? We can validate that and get back to you.
Yeah, arts and culture had a significant hit to their budget.
As did tourism, because of the lodger's tax. So if the lodger's tax revenue forecast is going to decline.
Oh, you froze on us,
Yeah.
Mary.
The decline in lodger's tax was the largest decline of all of our revenue sources. So both tourism and arts and culture are directly funded by lodger's tax and lodger's tax exclusively.
So would you all have those percentages that you can give us as a breakdown of departments, that how the percentage, how they were, I guess, what percentage they were given, obviously based on the funding sources?
So some departments, they ended up with blended rates. So like say utilities, environmental services, the assumption was a 33% decline in GRT. And so they get one increment of GRT, but their fee, and that's 2.3 million in FY20, versus their fee income, which had a decline of forecasted decline of 25%. And so when you think about it in a weighted average, if 30% of their revenues is GRT and 70% of their revenues are fees, then it's that ratio between GRT and fee income. So it's somewhere between 25 and 33%.
Is there a way to summarize that so that we have an understanding and the public has an understanding of departments, their funding sources, even though they're sometimes blended, and why a percentage was asked of that department for reductions, so that we can see across the board what that looks like?
I want to add in one level of, Mr. Chairman and Councilor, I want to add in one level of complexity. We are about to go into a special session on Thursday with potential additional state funding that would be coming to the table for local governments. In addition, the $100 million revenue decline was just pure revenue, what our forecast is for the 12 months of FY21. That does not, the calculation for what we will use from our cash reserves is not factored into that $100 million number. So right now, if we were to give you those estimates, which we could do, it would be a preliminary estimate based on a $100 million revenue decline. But there are these outstanding factors on the revenue side. We've always talked about expenditure levers and revenue levers, so that those percentage declines do not factor in any of the additional cash reserves that we could budget from our general fund reserves or from the utility fund, or any of the additional potential state funding that might come our way as a result of the special session.
Councilwoman Villarreal, if I could just jump in here, she got me thinking though, and I think is raising a really good point. We don't want to go into the budget hearings not having an idea of what went into the thinking of it, and like blind in a sense. So the more information you could prep us with and provide us with between now and then, I think the easier and the smoother our process is going to go as a finance committee. Because yeah, she's right. We're going to see one day one department that cut 10%, and then another one that cut 50, and then we're going to be like, oh, well, what the heck's going on? And I don't want to spend a lot of time during those budget hearings dealing with that. I'd rather get that stuff done ahead of time. So thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal, for asking these questions. And I would encourage the other committee members, whatever information we want ahead of time, we need to start asking for it, so that I guess, to give it a good example, Mary, we want to know the rules of the game before we sit down and start playing the game. You know what I mean?
Absolutely,
So,
Mr. Chairman,
Villarreal.
Councilor.
And when we say rules of the game, they're really like, some of them are mandated by the state and we can't change them unless something changes at the state, which I totally understand. However, there are things that seem to ebb and flow based on values. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. I think there may be some ways to look at the bigger picture, like holistically, like how we're thinking into the future of what we want to support, given that we have this budget deficit, and what are the things that we really want to lift up that will support communities that are already marginalized, but possibly could be even more vulnerable as we look into the recovery, or, you know, in the pandemic phase that we're in. So I guess I'm just wanting to get a more holistic picture. And it would help the public too, because I don't think it's not general knowledge that we have these different, we have enterprise funds and what that means, and that we draw from that, and that there's certain departments that depend on that revenue source. So I think it's just, we need to simplify it on that level until we start getting into the granular, and then when we get into budget hearings, I think it would be helpful. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Villarreal. Councilwoman Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councilor Villarreal. I think that all of us have had many emails and phone calls on the police budget, and people are very interested that we take a look at that, and they have demands that we take a look at that. And I think that any information that we can get, as Councilor asked, prior to starting the actual hearing, so that we can have some input on it. I think it's really important, because time's not our friend in these things ever. And, you know, I don't think this year in particular, I don't think we can be rushed through this. We need to really vet some of these things. And I'm just encouraging that we get information sooner than later to start having discussions and taking a look at where things could go, because we've all had a tremendous amount of communication from constituents. And I suspect I've gotten the same communications that others have had. People have been pretty clear about their desires. So I thought that really, it shouldn't go without being said that that's what we're hearing. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, anything else from the committee? Okay, so then with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
I have one more thing, one more announcement.
Right.
On a former member of our finance committee, Councilor Mike Harris, became a grandfather today.
Oh, awesome. That's a good one that's a high note to end on.
Isn't it? So congratulations to Mike and Marilyn. We're thrilled for them.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.